Hey, I'm Chris Ralph, the professional prospector, and today we're going to talk about why mining is good. Now, I know that this goes against the grain on a lot of people because there's a narrative that's been around for a long time, and it's mostly left-leaning, but you can find people on the right that think the same thing, that all mining is evil. And mining destroys the environment, and people die because of mining and stuff like that. And there's a lot of that that's just flat out not true. And we're going to kind of go over some of those things. Now, the first reason of why mining is good, it's because we need this stuff. Whether it's your cell phone or your computer, your tablet, your car, the camera that I'm filming this on, all our electronic devices use stuff that has to be mined. I mean, if you want to live the life that you're living, or maybe even better, you need mining stuff. Because, hey, if it can't be grown in a farmer's field, it has to be mined. Now, a lot of people will look at this narrative that all mining is evil and, say, well, let me show you. And so, yeah, let's look at some pictures of past mining and we'll talk about that.
So I'm going to show you some pictures of really environmental damage that's been done by past mining operations. This is something that people commonly think of, which is acid mine drainage. A lot of mines have significant sulfur minerals, or sulfides, combinations of metal and sulfur, and the action of air and water, oxygen in the air and water on the sulfides, produces sulfuric acid, and the sulfuric acid can dissolve more metals, and basically the sulfuric acid helps make more sulfuric acid. So this kind of stuff, it is bad. So here's another example of an acidic mine drainage, only this isn't the obvious orange with iron salts. It's the blue and greens with copper salts. And this isn't any better than having iron leach out of the rocks. The copper is as bad or perhaps even worse. Here's one people will talk about. In the 1800s, miners were allowed to literally wash away hillsides of gravel in their search for gold. And you can see they would play these giant streams of water against the gravel and just wash it all down, where it would go into what they call a sluice box. The gold would be recovered, and the mud and sand and stuff would just be dumped into the river. And they actually would go downstream, and there were farmers' fields in the valley below that were being buried with 3 and 4 feet of mud and sand. And a lawsuit in the 1880s actually put a stop to this practice. It was so bad that even in the 1800s they realized they couldn't do this. It's been more than 140 years since these mines were shut down by court action way back in the 1800s. And you can see there's still big scarps where they ran their hoses against the sides of the hill, but trees and plants and stuff have started to grow back. Here's another view of the same pit, and you can see that in 140 plus years, nature has started to reclaim it herself, even though the miners from this area never reclaimed anything from that time period. But you can see trees and bushes and all are starting to grow back and cover over the land again. Here's a large open pit mine, and certainly the big open pit mines create a large surface disturbance, and probably a lot of environmental people would look at this and say, well, look at that terrible surface disturbance. But think about all the big cities in our country and around the world. The LA suburban area probably covers more than 1,000 times this area's surface disturbance. And yes, it's not as deep, but still 1,000 times more surface buried with concrete and asphalt and houses and apartments and retail space and everything else. There's a whole lot of animal life that's been displaced with that kind of stuff. So it's really not fair to look at something like this and say, oh, it's a horrible surface disturbance, when we ourselves make surface disturbances far worse. And, I'll tell you the truth, I had a difficult time finding environmental problem pictures. It's not that there were zero, but there wouldn't be the hundreds of pictures like you would expect. No, mostly the pictures were either old stuff like I showed you, or new modern mines like this, where there is a surface disturbance. But hey, like I said, we need this stuff.
Now, I totally agree that historic mining law requirements for reclamation or, cleaning up a site after they were done was totally inadequate. And so that's why most of the pictures, like I say, that you see when people say, oh, mining is evil, they'll show you something that, was mined many decades ago to maybe a century ago, maybe even older. But you know what? The last time I looked at my watch or the clock on the wall or my cell phone, it isn't 1875 anymore. It's not even 1925. We're way into 2022, but almost 2023 when I'm making this. So things have changed. Mining reclamation laws have totally changed. Modern mining reclamation is a complete other story that has almost nothing to do with what was done in 1875. These days, a mining company needs to post a bond. In other words, what happens, they have to submit a plan. It goes to the BLM. The BLM or the Forest Service or wherever the land happens to be. The government looks at, what they're proposing to mine. They're going to do this, whether it's an underground working or an open pit or whatever. And they'll look at it and say, well, if you mined all to the last day, and then we had to clean up the full extent of your mining, and then we had to clean up, it's going to cost $4 million, or they'll come up with some number, right, depending on the impacts of the mining, to remove the buildings, to reclaim the work, to spread out soil and grow seed, and they'll figure out a number, whether it's 4 million or 10 million, I don't know, it depends on the product, or it depends on the project. But then they'll require the company to post a bond for that. So the company either has to put in deposit in a bank and set it aside, or otherwise get some agency to post a bond or something to pay for the reclamation if they should end up going bankrupt and walking away. And, that does happen once in a while, even in modern times, but the bond will then pay for it, even if the company doesn't exist to take care of it themselves. Let's take a look at some modern reclamation so you can get a feel for what it's really like today, not in 1875, but today.
So what do you think about this mine? Doesn't it look terrible? Awful? I'm talking about the one right there in the foreground that's just in front of me. Not anything in the distance, in the hills in the distance, but the greenish hill in the foreground. That's a mine that's been reclaimed. All the buildings have been removed. All the roads have been smoothed out. All the other things that go with mining are gone. And it's been recontoured and replanted. And now it just looks like a hill. Just like the hills in the distance, only not quite as steep, but it never was as steep. So that's just naturally how it was. But this is what a reclaimed mine looks like. The mine from the previous picture was actually an underground mine, and this picture here is where the portal was, where the entrance to the mine was. You would never know, it's just the size of a hill, but there's a little marker here that they left behind to note that this is where the entrance to the mine was. Here is an actual work in progress. You can see the disturbed brown areas. Those are, that's the active mining area. And you can see in the distance the hills with the darker spots on them. Those are bush kind of trees. They're pinyon pines. And then in the middle there's a sage green area that doesn't have any darker trees growing on it. That's actually a worked area that they've mined over and replanted, just like I showed you in the previous pictures. And it's relatively fresh, and so you can still tell a color difference, but as time goes by Trees will grow, and you won't be able to distinguish this from the other undisturbed hills in the area. Here's an aerial view of a mining area that's been reclaimed and turned into a golf course. Here's an open pit mining area that's in the process of reclamation. They may be still doing a little bit of mining here, but you can see they've smoothed over hills, they've planted them with grass. In time, trees will grow, and in time, you won't be able to tell that there's ever been any mining here, but it's in the process right now, as the mining companies, many of them are wont to do, that once they're finished with an area, they will begin reclaiming it, even if they're working still in an adjoining area.
Now, most people, left or right, will, say that, hey, it's good that the government looks into this stuff and makes sure that these companies clean up. But the truth is, one of the biggest mining-related disasters, environmental disasters, to occur in recent years was done by the EPA. They took a Superfund site that was mined in the past, and it had some issues, and so they took over based on the bond and other money that was available, Superfund money and stuff, and went in there to do the cleanup. It was a complete disaster. Let's take a look at some pictures of how the EPA does it.
The EPA decided that instead of actually cleaning the water, they were just going to contain it inside the mine. But it was a very bad design. The mine water built up and built up and built up inside the mine until there was tremendous amounts of it, and then it broke free. This is a picture of the flow long after the initial busting free phase. This is what it looked like downstream during the initial busting free phase, when the bulk of the mine waters were flowing out. The EPA paid most of $100 million to settle damages with downstream folks that were exposed to this, and even farmers as well.
I also want to say that if you're, so modern reclamation, we need this stuff, and modern reclamation is good. And I also want to say that you should be in favor, that all of us should be in favor of mining in developed nations like the US or Canada, or any of the developed countries that have laws and enforce them. Because the problem is, in the developing world, where often mining gets shoved because we don't want that in our backyard here in the US. It's 50 miles away or it's 100 miles away, but I don't want it because it could impact me. I might drive out there and I could see something that was mining. Well, you know what? If you have a cell phone and you have a laptop and a camera and other things, you're the guy creating the demand for this. You're the one that's saying the mining has to happen. So you should be in favor of seeing it in the US. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of these developing nations, like I say, they have mining laws maybe, but they're not enforced, or they don't have any mining laws. Or the mining is done by individuals, small groups of guys working together, and it has horrible impact, and no one cleans it up. No one's going to clean it up. There is no bond. There is no legal requirement. And so terrible things happen environmentally, and no one's there to oversee it and make sure it gets fixed. Let's take a look at that.
Now, there is a lot of large-scale mining in the developing nations, but there's also an awful lot of this small artisanal type mining, and this stuff is almost always an ecological disaster, because these guys, they don't have the money or equipment to restore anything. There's no bond, there's no requirement. They go in, trash the place, and then leave. In most developing nations, these kinds of sites are illegal, but, really the government rarely enforces those developing nations. The governments rarely enforce anything in these types of places, and so they just get trashed. It's also a hazard to the people that are there. There's no sewer system, there's no drinking water. It's all just, haphazard, catch as catch can. And where the deposits are deep, these workings can be huge and go on and on and on for decades. and it's a disaster the entire time. So if you're against mining in the developed nations and you still want to keep your tech, then this is what you're advocating for.
So like I say, if you are against mining in the developed countries, you're in favor of pollution. Or you have to live like it's 2,000 years ago. If it's 100 AD, you could live like that. You'd have no cell phone, no car, no television, no anything, none of the stuff that requires any electronics. You have to go back and live like it's deep long ago in the past. And nobody wants to do that. Surprise, surprise, people don't want to give up their tech. But you have a choice. Give up your tech because you're the one creating the demand for it. Allow mining, support mining in the US or other developed nations, or be in favor of pollution. And what happens to most people is they don't want to give up their tech. They don't want mining anywhere within 1,000 miles of them. And so you're in favor of pollution. That's your choice. You have to land on one of those three. There's no other option. And because there's no other option, that's why mining is good. Because we want our tech. We don't want to live like cavemen in 10,000 BC or something like that. And we aren't in favor of pollution. So let's do mining here in the US and the other developed nations, Australia, Canada, other countries like that, where they have good environmental laws and there's good requirements and they're enforced and it actually happens. Now, most of the videos I do, this video is a little bit different. It's kind of an opinion and maybe a little bit political, but not super political, but a little bit. And, I do a lot of videos and most of them are related to prospecting for gold. And if you are interested in prospecting and, the part that leads to the mining, well, if you want to, it's a skill set that you have to have in order to do that. And if you're interested in acquiring that skill set and having that become something that you're interested in, well, I wrote a book about prospecting for gold called Fistful of Gold, because that's what I want you to have, fistful of gold. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book right now. So let me tell you a little bit more about my book. It's called Fistful of Gold, and I wrote it because I want you to be able to go out and find for yourself Fistful of Gold. And you can see that it's an encyclopedia with all kinds of information, pictures, and that sort of thing. It's not in color, but color would have cost me a lot more to have printed, and so the book would have cost a lot more. It's for sale on Amazon, and you can pick it up. I'll put a link in the description below. I also serve as the editor for a prospecting magazine. It's ICMJ's Prospecting and Mining Journal. And honestly, you should check that out. We got stories and information, legal stuff, everything you know to increase your skills as a prospector. I write articles in this every month, and a lot of other very experienced prospectors contribute to the magazine as well. So check the magazine out. Also, I have a website, and the website is at NevadaOutbackGems.com. I'll put a link for it in the description below, but there's gobs of information there that you will find useful in your prospecting efforts. Finally, I want to say that I really appreciate your comments and thoughts and even positive criticism. Don't come on there and just toss out insults, because I'll just delete your comments. But if you've got helpful things to say and questions to ask, do write and put those in the comments, because I answer my comments to people, and you'll hear from me in responding to you. So if you've enjoyed this video and you like what you see and you're interested in finding out more, well then sign up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so they'll let you know when I post new videos. And like it and share it if again you see stuff that you really are excited about. And I'll be coming out with lots more new videos, and so we'll see you again real soon.